In the last lesson, we learned about Kubernetes services and how they act like a load balancer inside of our Kubernetes cluster. In this lesson, we'll tweak our services so that we can access them from outside the cluster. Previously, we deployed some pods behind a Kubernetes service, and then we accessed those pods from a test container that we deployed inside the cluster just to prove that it was working. When we did that, the Kubernetes service that was created got an IP address which we know as the cluster IP. When you run a kubectl get service command, the cluster IP is one of the fields listed, which you can see here. If we want to make this service accessible to clients outside our Kubernetes cluster, we have at least one other option. If we declare our Kubernetes service as of type node port, then Kubernetes will allocate a port, usually above 30,000, which is the default, to expose the service on the node. Once you've done this, you can then access the IP address of any of the hosts on the allocated port to reach your pods. This is handy, but you still need a way to connect to these services when the nodes themselves might be going through lifecycle events like scaling or upgrades. So many times we add a little more flair to our services by using a service of type load balancer. Now, while services of type node ports should work on any Kubernetes cluster, a load balancer service often requires a cloud provider to help us. This is usually a controller that can interact with the cloud that the cluster is installed on. In a TKG cluster on VMware Cloud on AWS, these clusters are able to request a load balancer from the cloud service and then connect them to the nodes in the cluster. And as the cluster goes through a lifecycle operation such as scaling or upgrades, the cloud controller will adjust the external load balancer to compensate for the changes. Luckily for us, to use a service of type load balancer, we only have to add one key value pair to our desired state configuration. Just add type load balancer. Let's try it in our terminal. I'll deploy a pre-built manifest that deploys a set of pods and a service of type load balancer. Once our pods look to be up and running, mostly, we'll check on the services. We have a service called My First LB service. And notice that we still have a cluster IP for this service, but we also have an external IP address. This external IP address is the IP address of the load balancer the cloud created for us. Let's open up our web browser of choice, and before we check out that external IP address, let's show some appreciation to Brandon, the author of our test container. Thanks, Brandon. Then let's go to our external IP address of the service, and it looks like it works. Let's play! Good luck in your lab, and tell your boss that this is an important lesson for your Kubernetes training. You've learned a lot so far, and you deserve a break.